What I will say is that I met David some years back when he was one of the people who challenged me to quit smoking at just the right time. It helped. And he's spoken here several other times. Most recently, I recall speaking about rabies and the various campaigns to eradicate rabies, what was wrong with them, and took what was a topic that not too many people were too sure of at first and made it interesting to everyone. And again, tonight we've sat here and talked about psychopaths and what makes a psychopath and what does not. And I think if we hadn't had the microphones pushed forward for us, we could have kept that one up for a little bit longer. So all I can say is that when he said he wanted to come over and talk about Hongshan jade carvings in his latest book, I thought to myself, well, this is one I'm going to watch because he's going to make it interesting, whatever it is, and I'm going to sit back and enjoy it. David.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jake, for that kind introduction. So the title of my talk is Hongshan Jade Carvings, Collection and Controversy. Probably more than one. Now, I'm going to give you a brief definition of jade, or as the Chinese would call it, yu, say a couple of words about the Hongshan culture, and then how I started collecting Hongshan jade. And then we're going to talk about authentication, which I think the subjective and objective elements, Hongshan agate, and the politics of collecting. And I've kept off another topic which I shall be discussing tomorrow night at the Royal Geographical Society, which might be even more controversial, and that is Hongshan Shuijing, or natural glass. However, back to this. So, definition of jade, or yu, yok in Cantonese, is, I think, beautiful hard stones that can only be carved by grinding. I mean, that's a pretty pathetic definition, but basically what we're going to concentrate on mainly is nephrite jade and agate, or mayu. Jadeite doesn't really come into it because it wasn't, that's the stuff that you see in the jade market. It wasn't introduced into China until the Qing dynasty. Now, the structure of both jadeite, which is at the top, and nephrite are chain silicates. In the case of nephrite, it's a double chain. And here, if you imagine each of these as an oxygen atom linked covalently to other oxygen atoms, and the ones that are shown clear have a silicon atom behind them. And then, of course, that will leave you with some unbalanced charges, which are then negative charges, which are balanced by calcium and magnesium, or possibly, since magnesium 2+ substitutes for iron 2+, by iron. Okay, that's all the technical stuff, except to say that the colors of jade, especially Neolithic jade, depend on how much iron there is. If it's pure magnesium, then you've got the beautiful, pure Kunlun jade that drives modern collectors mad, but actually bores me to tears. And you get other colors which are due to contaminating minerals. Now, here are two offcuts from New Zealand jade. The Maori carved this what they call punamu, and I just put this up because these were given to me in Hokitika 7 years ago when we went to visit, and you see that on a natural jade boulder there is a skin, and that skin is due to weathering. It's due to chemical weathering, and it makes the point that jade is an extremely weatherable mineral. There's a law that it obeys, which is that the higher the temperature and pressure under which a mineral is formed, the more it doesn't like it, and then tends to react when you bring it up to the surface. So jade, contrary to what Confucius said, which was that jade never varies, and he was pretty poetic about jade, that's all actually inaccurate. It weathers highly, has a high propensity to weather, and that will, of course, also be a function not just of time, but of how wet it gets. So burial conditions. Now, the Hongshan culture is believed to, by probably somewhat dubious carbon dating of burials of sites, to be about 3,500 to 2,000 years before the current era. And it was based in Liaoning in Inner Mongolia, and the best known burial site, which I'll come to at the end, was at New Heiliang. If you look at this map here, I'm not sure if I can point, but anyway, the site, is the culture was based around here. So Inner Mongolia and Liaoning province, and this is Beijing here, and Qifeng is there. Those little red spots we'll be talking about tomorrow night, but New Heiliang is around here. And it was discovered by Professor Guo Daoshun, who's the main archaeologist, who we'll also be talking a bit about later, who very kindly took us there in 2004 and again in 2008. Now, how did I start collecting Hongshan jade? Well, I didn't like jade, actually, before. I thought it was rather boring. And then I went into a shop, now defunct, in Cat Street. This is in about sometime in 2000. And this odd little piece, a sort of a squat, funny little figure with pixie-like ears and something on its head, caught my attention. I asked him what it was. He said, it's Hongshan jade. And I said, how much is it? And he was asking 3,600 Hong Kong dollars. But he said, you're a good customer. You can have it for half price. So I bought it, thinking Jenny would be quite angry, but she wasn't. Because I felt I really had to work out. It reminded me of something. The bump on the forehead here. And when I got it home, I thought about it. I suddenly realized, that's obstetrics. That was it. Delivery of the first baby. You know, we're relieved that the head came through the edematous vulva, but you weren't worried about that because and the head. So I think this is it's still one of my favorite pieces, the god of safe delivery, and you can account for the polish in that area because you can imagine the shaman who had this piece, and you know, every pregnant woman comes along and touches it. That's what you want to see. Note, not a pair of feet, okay? You don't want a pair of feet or a bottom. And this was the second piece I got, which I also think is very witty. To me, it symbolizes the weight of religion bearing down on man. You know, it's a very humorous piece, and there's a lot of humor. This is mask, a shamanic mask. Well, then Bruce, who's here in the audience, pointed out a lot of the smaller pieces, which had the advantage that they were much less expensive. So I started to collect those, and to date I have quite a large collection. These are just pieces taken from the book, different chapters, to show, and that's a centimetre scale. So you can see almost all of these are pendants, were worn as pendants, or charms, or amulets. Now, if you just remember those and the general sort of nice look about them and compare them with the sort of thing that you can see in Hollywood Road, many shops. There are reliable shops in Hollywood Road, but mostly they will have this sort of thing, and they'll have the odd authentic piece dotted in just to catch, because there's no point in selling anything other than fakes, or let's call them copies, to people who don't know the difference. But you have the odd one to catch the eye of the person who has an eye. Well, I want to tell you a little bit. This is one of our favorite pieces. This is it's two views of what is called a Zhulong, or pig dragon, which is a very, very typical Hongshan icon. And it's about 10 centimeters tall, in a really beautiful green and blue jade with a red face. So the carver has carved this piece with great affection using the natural colors of the jade. And note also that it's got rotten bits. This is weathering, and the weathering occurs across carving lines. It's dotted around, that piece, to me, it has many features of authenticity, which we'll talk about in a bit. This piece is photographed, probably illegally, in Shenyang Museum. It's the same sort of size, and it's one of their favorite pig dragons. And to me, a feature about it is the jade is, let's say, not desperately exciting. The piece has little to commend it in terms of evidence of age. We'll come back to that in a moment. Well, it brings us on to evidence. What is the definition? The concise Oxford Dictionary, which is the only dictionary which we can afford, says it's the available facts, circumstances, etc., indicating whether or not a thing is true or valid. Then we have sense. This is sense common. Definition, sound practical sense, especially in everyday matters. And I think these both are relevant, such as, for example, price. I mean, price to a collector is very important. You must love a piece. You don't buy it because you want to sell it. You buy it because you love it and because you can afford it. So this piece here cost 250 Hong Kong dollars. I mean, I got a good price because the dealer knows me well. And the estimated value of the piece on the right, which we've just seen, is 2.5 million US dollars. Okay, so that is a ratio of 10,000 to 1. And it maybe encapsulates much of the problems with China's view of Hongshan, because they're looking for perfection. It may well be that they are asking for fakes. Now, this, for example, this is another common Hongshan icon, which is best interpreted as a hairpiece, because in every piece that you see, almost every piece here and here, are holes. And actually, we've got 4 granddaughters, Jenny and I, and I've got 3 small pieces, which I've tried out on our youngest granddaughter, and it works beautifully as a hairpiece. Beautifully. You stick a toothpick, which hadn't been invented in the Neolithic period, as far as we know. If they had, then none have survived, but it works very well. And these pieces are found on, normally the head of the deceased, the buried body. Now, this is the one in the museum, okay. It's got, again, rather little to commend it. This is incredibly light, and the weathering is highly focal, and it goes right through the piece. So you've got crystals you can view, jade crystals, which have hydrated on both sides of the piece. So let's look now at evidence of authenticity. I think we have subjective evidence and objective evidence. And to me, art, iconography, humour, and a business model, they're all a bit subjective. I mean, you could say, people sometimes say, well, they'll do anything for anything. I mean, they don't have to be paid almost in China. But I don't actually think that's true, and I'll illustrate that later. This is a group of sea dragons, variations on the sea dragon thought, which is Shilong, which is this is a beautifully proportioned sea dragon here. And these guys, this is a dog, a sort of rabbit, a rather poorly proportioned sea dragon. This one's sort of squashed out as a disc. This one's got a bird on its head, another dog, a pair, maybe a bear. Really interesting variations on a theme. And I've been really impressed. We've now got about 1,000 pieces of nephrite jade, and the variation is enormous. You often get pairs. You often get, you find a sister piece because maybe they carved 2 of the same idea. But so I tend to look for variety, and basically most of these pieces cost about $225 US. That's in Hong Kong, so that's probably more than you pay in China. This is a lovely piece, a beautiful piece of jade. 2 views. By the way, you can see 2 views because these are mounted in Photoshop, which gives, I think, some of the sculptural feel of the piece. A very high quality jade, but again, you're still seeing evidence across carving lines of weathering. But this probably had been kept relatively dry. Here's a group of birds. This one here is, and these 2 are really pretty classical Hongshan icons of a hawk-like bird perched. But then you've got double meanings. This one doubles as a face. This is a really Picasso-esque bird here. And then, 2 ducks. This is a very, very high quality jade with a lovely red in it. This piece, you can see the use of the natural colours of the jade. So these are discussed in the book. This is a marvellous little mermaid. I mean, I think the Hongshan, or mer person, perhaps one should say, but a mer person. Again, with use of the colours, natural colours of the jade. Now, these 5 pieces, oopsie, we've lost them. These 5 pieces are interesting in that you don't find jade like this now. You don't find what I call, I forgot what I call it, but it's 2 different types of jade melded together, melded jade. If you shine a light behind it, the green will transilluminate, and the other colour. This could only have been formed at the time that the jade was formed, millions of years ago, deep in the bowels of the earth. And, you know, obviously, the Neolithic people got there first, didn't they? I mean, that's why they're Neolithic. So the colours and the variations of jade that clearly appeal to the Hongshan people. Now, some other icons. The notched disc, very, very odd. I mean, you can actually see, you can see your face in profile here in some of these pieces, but clearly this meant something very, very important to these people, who, remember, the culture is thought to have lasted about 1,500 years, and it's pre-Xia and pre-Shang, which we know nothing about, and pre-Shang. Characters on some of the pieces, a notched disc with 5 characters, which I've not been able to read, but then I'm not very good at reading archaic Chinese characters. This is a lovely symbolic god on an axe with characters here with weathering across the carving lines. Humour. Now this piece is just it's a nice piece of jade, but it's a double disc, and you think it's nice, but then when you turn it over, you can see the joke on the other side. There's 2 eyes and a pair of feet converted into a choir boy. And you can almost see the guy, delighting in turning it over on Sunday, at the back of the church and having a good laugh. Sex. In this era, they did not have television. They had very little to do, and sex was definitely high on the list. And some of the best sexual and erotic art comes from the Hongshan period. And I've seen, I didn't buy it, I passed it on to a friend, the sister piece where he's looking really as if he's straining and she's looking very, very happy. So that'll be my next book on jade, will be Hongshan erotica, and probably even Jake will buy a copy. And he's a journalist. This is a grumpy little goddess with horns. A lot of horned figures. I'll show you some in a moment. But you can see the suspension holes here. And you can imagine, people, her friends telling her off, Gladys, why are you wearing your grumpy goddess again? I'm not. It's not my grumpy goddess. It's my little secret. Because what she sees is the picture on the right. A baby with its hands in the air. A charming little amulet, because the point about an amulet is nobody else can read the same. And this piece, another reproductive sort of piece, it's obviously a fertility god of some kind, but when you turn it round on the right, you can imagine a baby crying. Now, that's all subjective, so we want something objective. Let's look at weathering, accidents of production, position at burial, soil signature. We'll get through all this fairly quickly. Here's another very interesting, rather erotic piece. I mean, you don't have to be too warped to imagine what the central feature represents, and then there are 4 chaps enjoying themselves. What I like about this piece, it's about that size. It's a decent size. Very nice jade, but the focal weathering on the surface, and if you look closely, I have to turn it upside down. You see 2 elements of weathering here. First of all, there's a natural crack in the jade into which water will have seeped, and as water seeps, it hydrates the tremolite or nephrite and turns it white, and also you get a capillary effect, you get iron salts going into it. So that is very, very classical focal weathering. But look at this area here, and then look at it. Notice we go from nothing, normal carving surface, to something very rotten looking, and it's microcrystals. crystals, could you have rushed this process? Would anybody have rushed this process? It cost me 2,000 Hong Kong dollars. Why would you wreck a nice piece of jade doing that? So these are questions that I think people who doubt that the authenticity of this stuff have to answer. If you look at weathering, here are three different views of weathering. This is the chin of the first piece that I got. You can see crystals expanding. This is a piece where the weathering is much, much, much more fragmented, probably much greater. And here's a piece where you've got unweathered jade, and then you've got a tract of weathered jade, unweathered, weathered, unweathered. And any of you have watched in the morning them switching on the water wall in Central will realize that water actually, left to its own devices, it will run down, it'll take the same route every time. And they actually have a guy with a water can spraying it at the beginning to get the water to go where it doesn't want to go. That might have something to do with it, I don't know. If you look at, these are some line drawing, if you look at this, if you look at the under the microscope, which I tend to do, you'll see that here's weathering going into, across here, then it goes in. What could this be? It goes in, it comes out again. My theory, for which I have no evidence at all, is that this is root marks, which roots would obviously be a vehicle for water. Now let's look at this piece, which is very interesting artistically, because it looks symmetrical, but it isn't. That is actually narrower than that, and up here it's the other way around. So you've got an illusion of symmetry because the lines are parallel, but they're not parallel to the long axis of the piece, which gives it artistic interest. But if you look at this area here under the microscope, you'll realize that it's rotting. I've just bought it in time, because given further time after burial, it would break off. What's happened is there's a line here, water's got in, and it's actually lifting up this bridge. So there are lots of things to be found in these pieces as long as they haven't been cleaned. Things like this, dropout holes where an extraneous crystal, which formed at the time of the jade, has popped out. Of course, water's going to track in, expand, and pop the crystal out. This is one that has escaped, a different shape of crystal. This guy, a very fine, somewhat arrogant figure holding a mask, but there are lines which obviously extend right through the piece, planes, if you like, of microcrystals, and the surface ones have popped out. So that's weathering. Then there are accidents of production and position at burial. Let's briefly consider those. This is I was pleased with this because I haven't really got a decent picture of someone using a bow drill. And there's a very good film called The Road Home, which a friend lent me, and there's this marvelous bit, these are frames taken from the film, of the old boy showing the use of the bow drill to repair the girl's porcelain pot that she dropped. And of course porcelain is just as hard as what we're talking about. He will have cheated by having diamonds in the drill bit, but you don't need a hard drill bit if you've got a hard grinding material. So the bow drill was certainly one element, and you see the backwards and forwards pattern. Here's a piece where you get certainly a suggestion of backwards and forwards movement as the drill's moved across to drill out this. You can ask, why is it not polished? Well, maybe the answer is that it's a very poor, low-grade piece of jade, and this is definitely pyrite. And if you polish it too much, the pyrite would have polished away. These are, I like funereal pieces. These pieces were almost certainly from the same tomb group and collected by a guy who was pretty depressed. You can't get more depressed. Even if you're a journalist, you can't get more depressed than thinking of a skull on top of a skull. That is really, really deep depression. But this piece here is the most beautiful of these, and a bird on the skull, and that doesn't take a lot of, you could read the symbolism there. But this piece is very interesting because it's the only piece that I've got where started the drill hole here, started the drill hole there, or maybe did it the other way around. Then he's done a second drilling with a different drill bit, and then the phone's rung, the Neolithic phone. Have you got that piece, Joe? You know, it's with the bird on the skull, the last of the series. Now, I'm just working on the suspension holes. Well, forget it. He's just snuffed it. He needs to be buried this afternoon. And the chances of David Anderson picking this up in 5,000 years are very, very little. So anyway, you won't know. So, I mean, very nice little example of an accident of production, which I think tells us a lot. It tells us a great deal, for example, about the technique for drilling the holes. Here are two pieces which I put together in life after they've been separated in death. Because this piece was given to me by the first shop I was talking about. When I got it home, I realised that there are watermarks in the eye sockets. And then about a year later, we went to Australia and visited Tony, a friend of ours, Tony Wilson, who collects a lot of jade. And I found the sister piece, which I persuaded him to part with. And there, the watermarks from the other eye sockets. So that really suggests that that's how they lay in death. Soil signatures, watermarks, and grinding and polishing material, and then we'll get on to something more interesting. There are, if you look in these pieces that haven't been cleaned, you'll see microcrystals often. And that, and they're not always the same. They, oh, sorry, yeah, I was pointing at the wrong figure. These are microcrystals in this area here. This next piece, we've got completely different types of crystal. And we have, I mean, I should say that I've done a lot of work intermittently over the years with, mainly with people at the Andy Bushby and Rick Ubik at Queen Mary College in London, who often can be hijacked for about a day, and then they say they've got something else to do, so, and I've got to go back. But, I mean, could this be faked, you know? And then, I mean, and look at this little piece, lovely little cow god. And under the armpits, I really like these little pieces because water will collect and it'll dry, it'll get more and more concentrated, and eventually it'll dry out in the recesses. So here are two types of crystals which we know are manganese-containing black crystals and spiky crystals. We think the spiky ones contain manganese carbonate from soil water. These pieces are iconographically interesting because they're multiple discs on this side, but because they've got an icon on the other side, they haven't been drilled through. If you look at this one here, under the microscope, we've got the same sort of crystals. We've got black crystals and orange crystals, almost certainly the same type as we saw previously, but less well formed. That tells us that the piece was buried face down. Has to have been, because it dried out. And it also provides potentially some retrospective archaeology, in that you can probably link those two to the burial site, same burial site. At least you can say they didn't come from the other burial sites. Watermarks. This is a piece which you might think, on the face of it, just looks too perfect. But that's probably because it's a lovely piece, artistically very, very fine. But if you look in, again, what did I do? Oh, I missed it. We've lost the piece. But in here, there are watermarks which must have got deleted at some point. I think it's one that I deleted because it hadn't mounted properly. So you have to take it for my word that there's evidence of chromatography in the suspension hole. Here is a really grotty piece of jade, okay? And I like rotten-looking pieces because to polish that, what they did, they had to polish it. And they polished, this tells us what the polishing material is. Green little micro pebbles stuck here in these crevices, partly caused by this is pyrite. And we've done, we've got a paper written but not yet published, looking at this under electron microscopy. And you see here, this is silica, okay? These crystals here are pure silica, and here is potassium, aluminium, and, well, forget about oxygen because that comes up in both. But what this means is that this is microcrystals of silica between mica. And so this is called aventurine, microcrystalline quartz with interspersed mica, which is the ideal polishing material. So I think we may have discovered what the polishing material, which nobody can reproduce, is. Agate. Okay. Now, agate is more controversial. This is a class, I mean, it's a picture I pinched off off the internet because I've forgotten to include one of my own. It's banded, and each band, watch, it's consistent right the way around, and it's also chemically consistent. And this is formed inside volcanic cavities over millions of years from silica in solution. And this is the first piece of Hongshan agate that I got, a lovely owl that I bought in Beijing in 2002. But there's some evidence here in the layers that something's happened. But a beautiful piece where, you know, again, the price was, I don't know, 2,000 renminbi or something. A lovely work of art. This piece is a grumpy god, horned god, with a bird face, but also, you know, a human face. And it's really rotten agate. You can see that so what's happened? Well, we've been able to take this soil material out and analyze it, and it's very, very high in fluorine. So here are a couple of other pieces. A lovely piece, which I paid $1.99 for on eBay, and the postage was substantially more than that. Note the color of the underlying agate. Okay, an obvious modern fake. Here's another favorite, a classical Hongshan bird in agate, where you can see that this is telling us that whatever this is reacted with is reacting selectively to the different bands, and the most plausible hypothesis is that it's mogonite, which is a form of silica that alternates in bands. Now, if you take pieces like this, which are probably, this is either modern, in which case somebody's not making a lot of money because I paid 600 Hong Kong for it in the jade market, or it's ancient and it's been buried under very fluoride low burial conditions. You can't really, I mean, it's a matter of faith. I mean, personally, I think iconographically and its interest, it suggests that it's authentic. These two pieces, what you can say about these is they're iconographically right for Hongshan. They look like they've come from the same artist. And what you can say with absolute certainty is because the bands match up, they came from the same agate nodule. So they've got the same artistic signature, same agate signature, but we don't know how old they are. But we'll come on to that in a second. And these three, likewise, these rather nice little women pendants, again, cost almost nothing on eBay. So this is what I call the agate barcode, which you only get with agate. And the conclusion is they were pieces carved from the same agate nodule, but we can't say for certain that they are ancient. It's a matter of faith. But then it's not perhaps as great a matter of faith as that the sea dragon in Shenyang is worth 10,000 times as much as the one I bought in Kowloon. This is an interesting piece. It's the only one I've seen where there's what looks like the cast of the original thread. Now, let's look at a modern agate carving factory, and we can do a little bit of business model stuff. I mean, Peter Barrett is here, and he's very much into business models. Fushin, Inner Mongolia, 2009. The salaries for the workers, $250 to $600 US per month. And this is you know, it's a production line. The guy does the drawing and then they carve it. And what they produce is this sort of stuff, for which there is a market. And these are going for, you know, thousands of dollars with noughts on the end. And you can see they've really used the banding of the agate very intelligently. So I argue in the book that you have to look at business models in understanding, I mean, the business model for basically illegally excavating artifacts. One of the problems you have no idea what's in the tomb. Another problem you have is you've got to get rid of it as quickly as possible. The third problem is you get executed if you're found out. And a fourth problem is that if they've not seen it before, nobody's going to believe that it's authentic. So let's talk for a second about the politics of collecting. We have the UNESCO Convention of 1970, and, oh, yeah, it's supposed to be convention. Unidroit Convention of 1995. We have political correctness, which paints the collector as the demon, and we have realities of life and archaeology in China. And I want to just finish with an illustrative personal Neolithic cautionary tale, which starts in New Heiliang in 2004. And we visited, we're taken there by Professor Guo, who's the archaeologist, and he took us around the site. And, you could see it was an archaeological site. There wasn't much to see. There were some bones on some of the graves. These are human bones, we believe. I mean, they look human. We've got a lot of photographs like this of tombs that had been excavated. One of these tombs, by the way, I was told that they hadn't been tampered with. This is how they were found. But one of them, not this one, the femur was upside down, so the head of the femur was articulating with the tibia. And I said to somebody in a position of authority in Shenyang Museum, that's been, reconstructed. And he said, no, well, I should say he or she said, so as not to give any clues. He or she said, no, maybe some rats moved it. On the other hand, there's the goddess temple, which is, UNESCO, actually the World Bank. I've got to get that right. If one says that wrong, it doesn't sound great. But I think of it as beginning with a B and ending with a W. They have spent a lot of money on the goddess temple, and this is the goddess. The goddess is an unbaked clay with two jade eyes, and the World Bank spent something like $25,000 building an awning over a muddy hillside. Okay, New Heiliang. So we went round and we were taken to Burial Mound 13, and Burial Mound 13 is interesting because it's a virgin burial mound. It was about maybe 6 meters high. Here you can see the burial mound. It was actually, it was clearly untouched. So I said, asked the chief archaeologist how much it would cost to excavate this, and the figure came back, $12,000. So I said, right, done. I'll raise that in Hong Kong. And then I got an email saying, thank you for raising $12,000, but what we'd like to do is suspend it, conserving what we've already got. So I said, that's not the deal. 4 years later, I went back to New Heiliang and visited Burial Mound 13. And I thought, this is funny. There's subsidence in a 5,000-year-old burial mound. That's a bit unusual, because it wasn't there 4,999 years ago. I mean, 1 year out of 4,099. And so I went down, and there was a bloody great big hole, an enormous hole, which had been partially, hastily filled up, obviously. This is Professor Guo looking into the hole. There's the hole. And this was rounded, were places where the limestone, which lines these graves, and may well have protected the jade, it didn't protect it against tomb robbers. And so here, this is where the stones have been pulled out within the past few days, because it had last rained 2 weeks before. Well, I went back to New Heiliang Burial Mound 13 with some other friends the following year. I went back to New Heiliang, and I said, please can I see Burial Mound 13 and what have they done? I was told that there was no point in excavating, no point in going into the hole. I mean, you and I would think, well, why don't we just go into the hole with a torch and see what damage has been done? I was told that wasn't a concern because they would have had to have power tools to get through the limestone and get into the contents of the graves. Oh, hang on, but we're in the 21st century, aren't we? I mean, maybe they have power tools like we have power tools. Anyway, the following year, this is where Jenny came with me and another friend, and here is the David C. Anderson Memorial Fence around this burial mound, which we were able to penetrate by lifting the barbed wire up and climbing under, and that's the hole. So this is another picture of this monument to total UNESCO stupidity, which I understand has now been refurbished because it was actually rotting That brings me full circle into a bit of politics. The Droid Convention. Now, this is interesting. It says, what am I doing? Am I running the risk of all my collection being claimed back by China? Well, this is what it says. The requesting state has got to establish that the removal of the object from its territory, in my case, the 2,000 objects, significantly impairs one or more of the following interests. The physical preservation of the object or of its context. No, I've preserved that, actually. I've done better. The integrity of a complex object? No. The preservation of information of, for example, a scientific or historical character? No, I've actually developed that with the help of some extraordinarily expensive laboratories that I've been able to use free of charge by just chatting the right people up. D, the traditional ritual use of the object by a tribal or indigenous community. That doesn't really apply. Or E, establishes that the object is of significant cultural importance for the requesting state. But hang on, these things are on eBay. Other people can see that too. So I'll be very interested in your comments on what the legal position is. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, you can stay up there and take questions from there, or come down and finish your cup of coffee, get another cup of coffee if you want, David. Another cup of coffee for
maybe another glass of wine.
Another glass of wine. Right.
Number of homespun artworks which have sort of ironclad authentication and come from tombs is about 200. And yet, by going to Cat Street and the Ladies' Market and so forth, you've collected about 2,000. How do you explain that?
Well, thanks very much. Before I try to explain it, I mean, I don't want to be too rude about official Chinese attitudes, but when I went in 2004, I took a microscope and I took, Angus Forsyth said, take some pieces. So I took 8 pieces. And we looked at them, and we looked at some of the officially excavated pieces under the microscope. And I was told that no, these are fake. And as if it was an argument, these are fake because some farmers brought us some pieces, and said they found them in the riverbed, which actually is the only safe place to find an archaic object. Because if you find it in a tomb and you take it away, you're going to be executed. And we sent them away because they were wrong. And then 3 days later, I said, how did you find New Heliang? And he said, oh, in 1980, a farmer brought me a piece. So I don't know. I mean, I think there are several problems. One is that the official argument is that all of the pieces that are accepted have to follow what they found in New Heliang. And New Heliang burial site is very, very atypical because they took limestone from across the road, a quarry. I mean, it wasn't a road probably, but they took it from 3 kilometers away, and they buried the dead in limestone, which is probably very protective. I mean, you can see if you look at the official booklet, you'll see that the limestone, there's lime covering the jade, and that may well be, that mild alkaline might well be protective. So it may, the kindest thing to say is that New Heliang may well be atypical, but we know that many, before they ever got there, many tombs have been opened in New Heliang, and as I said, some of the tombs have clearly been tampered with, so who knows what has actually happened. All I can say is internal evidence on small pieces and medium-sized and large pieces, internal evidence and science. Science says that you bury jade for 5,000 years, it must weather to some extent, and possibly less if you bury it in a limestone grave. But you know, would I have survived the Cultural Revolution? I mean, all of the excavations taking place since 1980, all of the official excavations.
Why are your pieces limited to that one region? Jade is produced in several areas of China, and there must have been Neolithic communities elsewhere other than that location. Why is it in that one location?
No, it isn't, of course, but I mean, I think that, you know, Mike, I mean, it's selection by me. I mean, I'm fascinated by Hongshan iconography. Now, you can argue that, okay, how do you know it's Hongshan? I mean, there are pieces that you can't, iconographically, I mean, if a piece has got a Zhulong on it and another icon, and I'll be talking tomorrow about the glass, which is even more controversial, and lacks the thing lacks what we have here, which is much weathering. The iconography is so rich. If you compare it with Liangzhu, for example, I mean, yes, I like Liangzhu discs, and they've all got this funny sort of icon on them, Mao Tai or whatever it's called. And that is, but to me, it's almost like, I don't want to be rude about the Catholic Church, especially when it's down, but if you go to Perugia Museum of Art, the iconography it's all, you know, mother and child and Christ on the cross. And it's like that the iconography, it seems to become very stereotyped in other cultures. Hongshan, on the other hand, it seems that the artists were allowed much more license, and you've got, I argue in the book, that you've got a lot of pieces where there's actually artistic evidence of pieces being made by the same hand. Within general, you know, people, somebody doing birds in a particular way with pointed beaks, and that's what I love about it. So I think it's selection by me as much as anything else. I could have collected, you know, Liangzhu if that had attracted me, from the same dealers, by the way.
Do I get to ask my question? Do I get to ask my question, or do we have some others? Or comments on the floor?
You ask your question.
David, you've been making noises about how you have something to reveal at your speech tomorrow at the Royal Geographical Society. Give us a hint.
I'm going to suggest an outrageous, I'm going to talk about Shui Jing, which is, I have discovered, and it's, I found out, is in fact glass. And the argument runs as follows. Glass, they couldn't have made glass in the Neolithic period, and that's true. They certainly couldn't have made glass in the Neolithic period that lasted 5,000 years or 4,000 years of burial. So I'm going to try and spin a tale about, I'm going to show you some extraordinary pieces of Shui Jing. You probably won't be there because you'll be busy writing your column. But, and I'm going to argue as to what the origin of this natural glass is. So the title of the talk, which I gave them, is Exploring the Mysteries of China's Unique Natural Glass.
And do you have a message for the government of China on Neolithic jade?
Yes, pay attention to it. Realize this is a heritage which you're rapidly losing. You know, get real. You know, this is coming out like there's no tomorrow. It's coming out from building sites. Anybody or people, you know, if you're a farmer in Liaoning, it's one of the poorest provinces in China. You have absolutely, and you have a tomb, and nobody has any motivation to preserve it, because there's nothing in it for them. They'll just have it taken away, like the guy who discovered the warriors. I mean, what's he doing? He's earning nothing. He's lost his land. So they really ought to see. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I think that it's been going on for a long time, but it's now accelerated, and somehow they need to change. And this is what actually went to Professor Guo with the idea which, in 2003. I said, this is flooding out. There's internal evidence that it's authentic. It's wonderful stuff. You know, you need to try and persuade the government to do something positive about it. Otherwise, you're losing all your, you're losing all your rhinos, or you're losing all your precious archaic relics, which are far more interesting, in my opinion, than the later stuff. But it doesn't quite square, that man 5,000 years ago, the species, had actually, a a culture which allowed such extraordinary development of art as part of, presumably as part of their religion and their beliefs. And, you know, it was pre-warring states, pre-warrior cultures. And you know, much of the history was destroyed by Qin Shi Huang.
But let me play a bit of devil's advocate
Yes.
here then, David. If all this jade had been kept in China, preserved, you wouldn't be speaking here tonight about it. You wouldn't have any of this. At least by getting it out across the world into the hands of collectors, you are acquainting the world with this Neolithic jade from this period of time.
Well, yes, but I mean, this is why UNESCO and Unidroid are, I mean, they're conceived mainly by archaeologists, and I don't want to be rude about archaeologists, but I think they're mainly interested in layers of dirt. They're objects themselves. I mean, some of them actually will say, some of them have been knighted, you know, for saying, well, once we've excavated the site, we should put the objects back, right? I mean, I think the objects are a wonderful, wonderful clue to the nature of this culture. And actually, if I could get people to look, I mean, one of the reasons I've been collecting the stuff, and especially the glass, because the glasses cost about a tenth of what the jade, piece for piece, what the jade is, because nobody believes that the Shuijing stuff that's coming through Beijing now is authentic, except me, well, maybe a couple of friends now. So yes, but I think that's the nonsense. And if you look at Unidroid, I looked at the Unidroid convention again today, and it talks about, you know, this being world heritage, but then somehow it all has to go back to the country, the physical country where it exists, which has got nothing to do with the culture that was there 5,000 years ago. And you see this in Italy. It wasn't the Romans that preserved, you know, Greek art. It was the Etruscans who the Romans, massacred the Etruscans. You know, and now Italy claims, having killed all the Etruscans, except possibly Berlusconi, this is being recorded. I didn't say that, but I mean, they're claiming it somehow. The balance is wrong, and one of the problems, I think, is that museums are not allowed to deal in it. If I offered, which I have done, to leave my collection or half of it to the British Museum or the Chinese University Art Museum, well, hang on, you're in catch-22 here. Either it's fake, in which case we don't want it, or it's come out illegally, in which case we can't have it. So the collector is in a responsible position.
Does the British Museum say that about the Elgin marbles?
Well, they've got those. You see, those were pre-1976, or whenever the date was, the cut-off date was. Yeah, well, I think they could give the Elgin marbles back. They could certainly give the Donghuang scripts back, because they could photocopy those and they wouldn't have lost anything.
Anyone else? Questions? David, thank you very much for an interesting talk.
Thank you, Jake.
We'll see how many want to come out tomorrow. You've almost got me tempted to whether I should go and write my column or come out.
Yes, yes.
Royal Geographical Society lectures tend to be quite good sometimes. I know.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yes.